Neal has the numbers and the insight and the knowledge to really tell us what's going on in this very strange world where the U.S. hegemony is being challenged like it has not been for probably over 20, 30 years or so, at least since the fall of the Soviet Union.
I think my answer is going to surprise you a great deal. I read a lot about the state of the world, and because as you can see today, what we do in multifamily, I have $1 billion portfolio, 800 investors, all worried a great deal because of what's happening with interest rates, and those interest rates, the hikes in them at this point are very highly tied back to the geopolitical situation. 6 or 12 months ago, a lot of it had to deal with extreme supply chain issues and also had to do with the fact that we had distributed $2 trillion of helicopter money. And so both of those were the dominant forces with inflation 12 months ago. The impact of that money, of course, because it's a one-time drop of money, is fading. And today I don't see as much of an impact as I did 12 months ago. The impact of supply chain is fading very rapidly. Supply chain issues are down. There are now 99 ships waiting off the coast of the United States, where there were 150 in July, and there were 300 12 months ago. So the backlogs on the supply chain side are dropping. Freight costs have dropped by more than half in just the last 6 months. So supply chain going forward is not going to be impacting inflation as much. Certainly the helicopter money that was dropped is not going to impact it because that is a one-time benefit and it sort of fades away. So today the big one is really geopolitical, right? So A, the Russia war is causing its own supply chain issues, and B, it's causing the price of oil to go up. And that's also affecting the stock markets. Obviously, that impact on the stock market then bleeds into the economy. So geopolitical issues are having a significant impact on my portfolio, on my investors, and my cash flow. And so I'm looking at it very carefully. And so what I'm going to say is going to be very surprising. I will upfront say that I've done my research and I believe the different people are saying obviously different things. The person that I believe has the best hold on this is a geopoliticist. He's somebody that really understands geopolitics. His name is Peter Zeihan, and Zion is spelled as Zeihan. So that's Peter Zeihan. I highly recommend that after you watch this podcast, if you find what I'm saying intriguing or completely bullshitting, I would like you to spend 30 minutes and watch any YouTube podcast about Peter Zeihan. So my belief very strongly, and it's not just coming from Peter Zeihan, I've done my research, is this: the US hegemony is the strongest it's been since 1945, which comes as a complete surprise to me. I felt that when Russia attacked Ukraine, the European Union would simply fall apart. Everyone would basically focus on what they wanted. You know, if oil was a need, or gas was a need, like Germany, they would basically look to their national interest, and the other parts, Finland, Sweden, they would look to their national interest. And I have been shocked, pleasantly surprised by the fact that the EU has not only held together, but has actually collaborated. The alliance against Russia is extraordinarily strong. And while you're correct in saying that Brazil, Turkey, India, and China are 4 countries that are hedging their bets, when you look at the strength of the alliance and what it has achieved, it is far greater than when Crimea was annexed in 2014. I would say the damage that is being done to Russia and the example being set is extraordinarily better than in 2014 when basically they walked into Crimea and took it over. So the Russian economy is irrevocably damaged for the long term. Today, Russia is the 11th largest economy in the world. I expect that in 5 years, it will not even be in the top 20. So their ability to project any kind of geopolitical strength is decimated. And in the long run, Russia will go from being an exporter of arms to being an importer of arms. And they already are. As you can see, Iranian drones are now attacking Ukrainian cities. That certainly wasn't the case, 3 months ago. So today, Russia has gone from being an exporter of weaponry to the world to being a mass importer. And I think that situation will get worse and worse. I also believe that Russia as an exporter of oil is at the end of its story. Russia has expensive oil. So a lot of countries like Saudi Arabia have cheap oil. We have sort of cheap oil. And then we also have shale oil, which is sort of in the middle. Russia has expensive Siberian oil. And The Siberian pipelines are all run by American contractors and companies like Chevron, which have now exited. In Siberia, if you stop pumping oil, what happens is because there's no pressure on the pipeline, the Siberian permafrost destroys the pipeline. It then takes 5 to 10 years to rebuild that. So not only is Siberian oil expensive, it's almost impossible to get the output back up if you stop. They've stopped. They stopped several months ago. So I think Russia as an oil exporter is the end of the line. Russia as a major economy in the world is at the end of the line. I think that impact is so stunning, so astonishing, and we're going to see it as its GDP falls. It's beginning to fall now, so Russian GDP is already falling, but I think it falls to potentially by 50% or more. So I think we're going to see a decade-long depression in Russia as we move forward. And none of that really changes regardless of what the impact of the war is, because if tomorrow Russia surrenders or Putin dies, I don't think that the next guy that comes in is going to very easily surrender. But even if they do, I don't think these sanctions go off. I think that the damage that has been done is pretty permanent. I think that the EU it will source its natural gas from elsewhere. So I think that from a geopolitical perspective, those that are expecting that the world order will break apart are in for a shock. It actually, what Russia did has massively strengthened NATO and massively strengthened the US UK hegemony. Now there are cracks elsewhere. Our financial system, the West's financial system, has come under severe stress because of what's happening. We saw what happened in England over the last 2 weeks, completely crazy. You'd see stuff like that in third world countries. You'd see stuff like that in Zimbabwe and in Argentina. But the fact that we're seeing stuff like that in the United Kingdom, where long-term bonds fall to 24 cents on the dollar, granted only for one day, but still that was just astonishing. So I think what this does is it has brought forward the great economic reset. And that's not good for anybody. It's not good for the West. It's not good for the United States or for Europe. But on the good side, we are still in the strongest position, and our position is getting stronger. You've already seen that with regards to the increase in the power of the dollar. But I think it's more than that. It's not just the increase in the power of the dollar. We are the only major economy in the world that is self-sufficient for oil and self-sufficient for gas. China, extraordinarily reliant on oil from various sources. So is India. And 5 years from now, Russia will be reliant on other people's oil because of the Siberian pipelines being permanently put out. And so they'll go from basically being an oil exporter to an importer. So I think that the damage that is being done to a lot of economies is substantial. Germany, because of their reliance on gas from Russia, it needs to basically pick up expensive gas from elsewhere in the world. They don't really want to go back to Russian gas. I don't see them going back there. And that means that the German economy is going to be damaged for the next 5 or 6 years. The impact of that is money is flowing massively into the United States and into the dollar. Massively. We've seen the impact in the last 60 days. It's shocking how strong the dollar is. Obviously, that's happening because money is flowing into the US. So, from a hegemony perspective, we are in an astonishing spot. Putin's done us a favor. I wouldn't have said that 6 months ago, by the way, but that's just the way it's turned out. But from the perspective of the world economy, we've taken an enormous hit. It's just inconceivable that we are going to get inflation down to 2% when the world's supply of oil is damaged for at least 5 years. You can't just make more oil. It doesn't work like that. Russian oil supplies are dropping. They will continue to drop regardless of whether China and India continue to buy Russian oil or not. That supply is going to drop. And I think the impact on that is the world economy is going to face significant inflation for the next 5 years. I do predict that at some point oil is going to cross $150 a barrel, and it should happen sometime this winter. And then it'll come back down. Supply and demand. U.S. can open more oil wells, and so can other countries. But I think that it will go back up several times over the next 5 years. We're going to see a number of oil shocks as a result of this.
Yeah, very likely. I mean, Saudi Arabia, of course, just gave us the finger in terms of importing oil. I think it's because they're at their capacity as much as anything. They can't produce any more than they are. Venezuela has a lot of oil, but their oil infrastructure has been so damaged over the last several years that they cannot just automatically start producing more oil. So, yeah, I don't know where it's going to come from.
Right now, I don't know where it comes from. I think it just comes from the price of oil shooting up. There's just very few options. There's now a movement in the last 90 days that we need to go back to the old days where we were spending, 3 times as much money as we're spending today on oil exploration. But keep in mind, from exploration to first drop of oil is 6 to 7 years.
Yeah.
So I think that for the next 5 years, the world is in a really bad position. I think Russian gas will simply not sell. Keep in mind, Russia can sell oil to China, they can sell oil to India, but their gas, nobody wants it. And because gas is very, very difficult to transport across thousands of miles, they're not going to sell their gas to anybody.
Mm.
And that, I think, is in an incredible problem. It's a massive problem for the world economy. I think that our move to green energy for the moment has failed, and we've seen the failure of that. I am still bullish that that direction is the right one, and we will take a number of hits over the next 5 or 6 years as we go through that transition. I'm one of those people that believes that those repeated hits to our economy may, in fact, in the long run, be worth it, because half of the wars in the world are just over the last incremental million barrels of oil.
Absolutely. We could have been so much further along in terms of green energy if people had not been fighting against it for the last 40, 50 years. The development of technologies have been stifled, and development of the technologies that are there have continuously been stifled by, geopolitical opposition to those kinds of things.
Well, ironically, in the US, that's the Republican Party. In obviously different parts of the world, it's different parties. Ironically, I think that it's the entrepreneurs who are very strongly Republican that are going to fix this, because the amount of money that is going into climate change solutions on the private sector today is absolutely mind-boggling. And out of every 100 companies that money goes into, one will become a true, unicorn solution. And I think that the public sector couldn't have done that. The Democrats are not set up to do that. So in a weird sort of way, once again, I think it's the entrepreneurs that are going to save the world. The only true successful example of a climate unicorn is Tesla. And obviously, you don't see at this point Elon Musk saying he's a Democrat. So I think that what has happened on the climate change side that's very positive is, for 10 to 15 years, where people have been pushing back against green technologies, they've had an argument which on its face is true, which is they're really, really expensive. These green technologies are extremely expensive. They were extremely expensive. As in 2010, solar cost approximately 10 times what it costs today, right? So today, just today, when you make that argument, it makes no sense whatsoever. So I'm also hopeful that we will get the new kind of nuclear back into the mix. But again, nuclear plants take about 6 to 7 years. So the world's in for 5 years of very rough time. And I'll come back to, real estate, obviously, because that's what I like to focus on. I think that anyone that believes that we are going to go back to 2% inflation is just smoking something really good, or drinking copious amounts of Kool-Aid. I think we're going to have challenges. We're going to have problems. And the sector that I'm in, multifamily, is already beginning to see the challenges, right? So if you read CNN or Fox News, right, what you're seeing is today, and this is commonly said, today, rent inflation is hurting inflation the most. Rental inflation is the biggest part of inflation. That is completely true and completely untrue. So the right statement is, if you measure over a 12-month time frame, rental inflation is the biggest culprit of inflation in the United States, not supply chain. But if you measure the last month, rental inflation had zero impact on inflation, because rents in the United States were negative last month. So we, after a long time, are now beginning to see two bad things happen in multifamily. The last 2 months, RealPage data shows that absorption in the United States is now dropping for multifamily, which means that occupancy is dropping and will continue to drop. And that number is growing. So let me just look at the numbers. We had 50,000 in negative occupancy for Q2 of this year. And in Q3, that number shockingly jumped up to 100K. So while there's still a million people talking about we are 4.3 million apartments short by 2035, very true. But for the moment, what really also needs to be said is, in the last 2 quarters, apartment absorption in the United States was negative 150,000 units, right? And I don't hear people saying that because it's not okay in the multifamily
Mm-hmm.
industry to ever say anything negative. If you say that, boy, you're going to get banned. And there's certainly nobody saying that rents in the US are dropping. And obviously, there I don't have much data. Rents in the US dropped 1 month, the last month, August. We don't have
Mm-hmm.
September data yet. So rents have basically dropped 1 month. And so it's early to say that rents are dropping, but I think that this is the beginning of a trend where we will see rents drop. Now, it is pretty common for rents to drop for 3 to 4 months a year, every year at this time. So
Mm-hmm.
it's, if you look at rents, people say, oh, rents have been going up 12%. True. But that doesn't mean that rents went up all 12 months. That means that they spiked in the summer and then they reduced in the winter, but the overall number was still a fantastic 12%. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? So this could just simply be that adjustment for this time of the year, or it could be the beginning of something
Mm-hmm.
bad. I'm leaning towards the beginning of something bad because of absorption numbers. So in previous years, where rents have declined coming into the winter, absorption was steady or growing.
Mm-hmm.
But today we're now beginning to see not just negative absorption, we're beginning to see growing negative absorption. So there's this feeling that, and I hear this all the time where people are like, oh, no one can afford a single family home anymore. And so, multifamily is going to do well. True. But once again, the way people make statements is the problem. You just said something that was true. We know for a fact that the percentage of Americans that are going to be renters is going to grow, right? So we know that.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, will they grow in the next 12 months? And the answer is most likely no. Because in the next 12 months, with the Fed hitting so hard, inflation hitting everyone, and now we're beginning to see the initial wave of layoffs, we'll see many more waves. You look at every recession, you don't see positive absorption of multifamily. You usually typically see negative absorption.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see occupancy go from 96 to 95 to 94 to even 93 during recession. So keep in mind, so where do those people go there if they can't buy properties? They go and live in dad's basement. They
Mm-hmm.
go and live in mom's spare bedroom. They go and live in their car. I don't know where they go. All I know is to assume that in the short run, the people that are no longer able to buy single family will go to multifamily. That's not a data driven approach. We're going into a recession and it
Mm-hmm.
could be a severe one. Yeah, I don't see any indications of that, by the way. Right now, I do see indications of a mild recession because of the strength of the US economy and its balance sheets. So I think it's fair to say, though, that over a 5-year time frame, maybe even a 3-year time frame, if I want to be a little bullish, we could see a significant increase in apartment demand. There's one number that I recently talked about, and that number was that in 2019, 47% of Americans could afford to buy the median home. Today, it's 21%. From 47 to 21 because of two massive hits. Number one, interest rates going from 3 to 7. So right now, today, the rate is 7.06. So it basically has more than doubled. So that reduces affordability. And second, the home prices have increased by 34% since the start of COVID. Now, I do expect that they will retrench. I'm betting that they'll go down about 10 to 15%. But here's the crazy thing. If they go down 15%, they're still up 19% since the start of COVID,
Mm-hmm.
and salaries are not up 19%. And because of interest rates doubling, obviously the overall monthly payment has basically increased by just such a shocking number that a 15% drop in home prices in the US would still create roughly 10 to 20 million new renter households, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they would be created over a significant amount of time, perhaps 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. So I'm bullish on multifamily in the long run. But anyone that at this point is saying that we're not about to face a really hard 12 months, drinking the Kool-Aid.
So, what is your advice to apartment or multifamily investors when we're going into a recessive period?
I think that if you're investing in, so I'm going to talk about both limited partners and general partners, because really the advice has to be specific to both, right? If you're a limited partner, I would invest in multifamily, but I would be careful and I would not be in a hurry. So, sometimes you basically say there's this fear of missing out or FOMO.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a limited partner today, you should be experiencing reverse FOMO. Reverse FOMO. Because every successive month that you wait, the prices of multifamily are likely to drop. So it actually makes no sense to invest today. And you might say, well, yeah, but then I'll miss the boat. The answer is normally that's true, but in this particular environment, that risk is pretty low. What I would suggest is that the market is likely to bottom in at the end of Q1 next year from a pricing perspective. Why? Because there's also tailwinds. High inflation means rents grow faster, so pricing is affected both by interest rates, and so that's a downward push on prices, and also by rents, which is an upward push. So these two things are pushing against each other, which is why we really haven't seen a huge drop in prices of apartments. What we've seen is a increase in cap rates. What that means is that apartments, if they had the same exact net operating income as they did a year ago, would be worth a lot less today. But because over the last year, net operating income increased because of rents, we haven't seen a huge change in the price per door, right? So we do see small declines, and I think that we're seeing larger declines in the next 3 or 4 months, because now the industry is really adapting. So I would say you should be experiencing reverse FOMO. I would say that the peak would not be at the end of a recession. It's very common for investors to get into a negative mindset and wait until the end of a recession. That is a very bad mistake. Keep in mind, the stock market in the 2008 recession bottomed out in March 2009. If I was to ask this question to 10 people, probably 9 of them would say the stock market bottomed out in 2010 or 11 or 12 or even 13. It actually bottomed out early. So the same sort of impact happens to real estate, where we're going through a retrenchment and a reduction in pricing, but the bottom tends to come sooner than most people think, because everyone's doing forward-looking thinking. Mortgage rates, for example, in the US, they are projected rates based on what the Fed will do in the next 3 or 6 months, not based on what the Fed's already done, right? So once the Fed stops raising, which should happen in Q1, I think we will see an adjustment. We will see the market not be as ridiculously bearish anymore. At least we know where we are. At least we know where the top is of the interest rate. So we kind of start to move towards that bottom. So I would say Q2 of next year, if you are working with an experienced syndicator, you're in a good place. But I think you have to be very careful about who you're investing with next year. You need to invest with highly capitalized syndicators. My advice to you is, bluntly, is invest with rich people, because what is going to happen is that while you might get the lowest price per door in Q2 next year that you might see for a long time, you will also get the highest interest rates, which means that there's going to be a lot of bumps in the road as the property basically deals with those high interest rates and low cash flow. And so you ended up getting the benefit on the buy, but now you basically got to successfully transition the property to a lower interest rate 18, 24, 30 months down the line. And that's a very bumpy path. And it's better to work with people that have some money in their pocket that can help the property. So that's my advice for LPs. Because of what's happening in the marketplace, because of home price increases, because of interest rate increases, a supply hole would develop in the next 18 to 24 months, which means that 30 months from today or 36 months from today, 3 years from today, you could be the beneficiary of that if you invest in the properties being purchased today. But be very careful, right? That's my advice for LPs. My advice for GPs is, don't be greedy. This is not a good time to be greedy. Wait until Q2. Wait until Q3 if you can. There's better deals coming. I think that this concept of multifamily prices will never drop. It's dogma. It's religion. It has nothing to do with math or reality.
So you're saying wait until Q2, Q3, and you really think by that time we're going to actually see property prices decline in the multifamily sector?
We've already seen them decline. If I look at prices as of January this year, and I look at prices, we're recording this at the end of October, that's almost 10 months. I don't know of a market that hasn't already declined by 3 to 4%. There are many markets that have declined by 10%. And that's happened despite the fact that we have seen increase in net operating income over that time frame, because rents are positive. Rents are growing, so properties are worth more because their income's going up. So the fact that we've seen an actual decline in prices on a per door basis should give us pause, right? So we're seeing a business environment that is highly positive, but we're still seeing a decline in prices. So one has to understand just how much interest rates can impact pricing. And I think that they will continue to have that impact going forward until at least Q2 of next year. We will still be in a recession at that point. I expect to be in a recession until Q3, maybe even Q4, who knows. But keep in mind, being in a recession doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad time to invest. It's often actually a good time to invest.